Okay, we are back, and this portion, we've been off the live stream doing interview applicants for TRL, Board of Trustee applicants, but this portion of our meeting will be live streamed and public virtual attendance is available on the Thurston County YouTube channel. And just so folks who are tuning in now know, we have the full Board of County Commissioners in the room, County Manager and Leonard Hernandez and Assistant County Manager Jennifer Walker. So the second piece, final piece of our agenda is to just kind of go over the historic jail space needs question. That's kind of resurfaced for the board, and I dredged up some of the old documents, and that's all in your packets, and you guys can look at that. I guess I had County Manager asked me to kind of give a historic overview for the board, and my goal is to do two things, just to kind of walk you through how we got where we are, and then I'll put on the whiteboard all the different options that were evaluated as possible solutions. And ultimately, we didn't move forward with any of them, but just so that we kind of all have that history. So going back to the beginning, the commissioners were trying to get a jail built for many, many, many years. I think the voters rejected two different initiatives on the ballot. When the Great Recession hit, and I don't know all the ins and outs, Robin Campbell was always able to explain it better, but the county's financial position, debt ratio, all that stuff. Meanwhile, the economy was really, in a bad shape. So a lot of contractors didn't have work. And so basically they were able to pull off phase one of the jail without having to get voter approval for a tax increase. And that was what the commissioners decided to do. And so they built what they called phase one. There was always intended to be phase two, which was more specialized cells. But they used a more modern approach of jail, which was having these pods. They called direct supervision model. So you have pods with a corrections officer right there in the pod with folks. And it was a best practice, forward-thinking way to structure a jail for an old traditional jail population. What then happened was, it wasn't a terrible idea at the time, but what happened was then there's criminal justice reform ideas started to take hold, and we started working on diversion programs and different ways to get folks that are lower level, low risk to the community out of sitting in jail. Meanwhile, mental health population, problems in the communities were rising. Those two things conflated to basically change the population of our structure of our jail population, which we already needed the flex unit, but as time went on, we more and more needed the flex unit because the folks that would have been appropriate for the pod and the direct supervision were a smaller number, and the folks in the jail that would have needed the more individualized cells were a higher number. And so we just continue to have an increasing mismatch. Meanwhile, jail population grows as the county grows and everything. I don't think it was a crime spike or anything, but it was just, natural growth of population. And as those beds started to fill, we had the situation which predates me coming on the board. So this was, I don't know when it started, but it was before 2018 that, we had folks that needed to be individually celled. They were using the limited number of individual cells for those folks, which meant there was the smaller contingent of women where it had to be placed in a different part of the jail. And we were getting kind of some negative feedback from Disability Rights Washington, and we were in negotiation with them. This is all this is all at the time I joined the board in early 2019. So that's where I come into it, and County Manager basically said, we've got this amount of debt capacity to issue bonds and to do some cap facilities with our REIT 1 capacity. At that time, the plan was to solve the courthouse situation with a tax, measure that would go to the voters and build a new courthouse. So we were thinking optimistically, if we don't need any of that money for the courthouse, because that's going to be handled on a separate track, then the county's bond capacity could be used potentially to build that flex unit, the phase 2 of the jail that never got built. And that was more and more increasingly needed. So we struggled with that all through 2019. Commissioner Hutchings was pretty much ready to go with it. Sheriff Snaza was pushing us really hard on it. And Commissioner Edwards and I were very, very reluctant to spend, for whatever reasons, I think different reasons, but we were both very, very reluctant to embark on a huge expansion of the jail. I was hopeful that, I was learning about the system, and I was hopeful that by, continuing to advance, criminal justice, alternatives to, restarting the LEAD program and all these different things, we could try to keep it to where we wouldn't need, kind of like it was during COVID, right? We had the restrictions, population was down, it was managed space-wise just because we had the space. But that was, obviously a little bit naive because we're a growing county, and there's going to be a need for that space at some point. But we struggled all through 2019. So part of a lot of what you're seeing in the packet are the memos that were given to us during briefings all during 2019. Some of them, you'd almost want to read, if you're going to read this packet, I'd read it backwards, because the 2016 memo was like a really interesting one, because it's where the board, here it was 3 or 4 years before I was even there, and the board had gone through all these different potential options with estimated costs. Obviously, those estimated costs are way under at this point, because they were back to the, they were high level in any case. So the commissioners finally, after going round and round and really wringing our hands about it, we agreed unanimously in the fall of 2019 to go ahead with design and build for the smaller. There were 2 versions of the flex unit, a smaller one with like 40 beds and a bigger one with like 120 beds. We decided to go forward with designing and building the smaller one, and then go ahead and designing the bigger one in case we could find more money or we needed it in the future. That's what was happening at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020. COVID hit. Robin Campbell comes in and says, you need to pause, we need to cut the budget by 10%, and we probably need to pause all capital projects because we just didn't know what was going to happen. And unemployment spiked like 1,400% in April of 2020 in Thurston County. So Gary and I were like, pause the jail. I mean, we were already like barely comfortable with it. And so Gary and I were like immediately like, pause that project. Gave us kind of an excuse to do what we were, kind of nervous about to begin with. So that got paused. And then everything that happened with COVID kind of, with jail restrictions and all that, it kind of kicked the can down the road. The problem was not acute at that point because the jail was under a whole different set of limiting criteria, and population numbers were down. They couldn't book for certain things. And there was a whole other set of problems that we managed with the jail and COVID and all of that, but quarantine and whatnot. But this whole problem was kind of frozen until, now it's coming back up because the jail, I think last summer, went to full booking of everything and, kind of back to complete pre-COVID normal. And so the same problem that was never solved is back. And that's why we started the jail task force, space needs task force, to start to kind of relook at these different options that I'll go through in a minute. Financially speaking, obviously the picture changed. COVID also took the ballot measure off for the courthouse. We didn't, it was feeling to me like that wasn't likely to pass anyway. That bond capacity that we were talking about using for the flex unit was the same $50 million that we then put toward the upgrade of Hilltop and then paused that. So, once we made that decision, the financial capacity to do the flex unit was kind of gone anyway. So that capacity to, we can't really go back to where we were in fall of 2019 because we've made other decisions for that money, for our other capital needs, like the new courthouse ideas and stuff. So we're kind of in a worse position in a way because we're back with the same problem, but now we have the main financial tool that we were going to rely on to maybe solve the problem has been pivoted to a different solution. So That's kind of the history, yeah.
Yeah, so, and I just want to add in there just a little bit, just for folks to know, going along with everything that Ty is saying. So in 2016, as far as the population, I think it's really important that as we think about this and talk about this, and just to give you guys an update, when we did the jail expansion first meeting, this was one of the main discussions everyone had, and Sheriff Sanders is completely on board with this too, but this idea of what is the capacity, what is causing the overcapacity in the jails, and the idea of, where mental health and substance use disorder, how they play into it. But in 2016, Disability Rights Washington, sued DSHS and said to DSHS that, you will not let our mental health patients who have been committed a crime sit in jail for long periods of time, and you will get sued. And so, and at that time, I was working on that. And by 2018, so then we started doing all of these statewide. So it's kind of in concert with all of this work statewide. There began this whole shift of what are we going to do to create programs outside that will actually complement the things in the jail so that we can divert from the jail. So then there became diversion options, and there started to be works programs like kind of like what Wayne is sitting on, the innovative jail programs. We started talking about this as a state, and then in 2018 we actually started to see a shift, and by 2022, with COVID, it was like the state started actually funding, because in 2018 we had to go ask for funding. By 2022, the funding was released in many different, so like King County Jail, for example, we wrote a program where the state gave King County Jail $80 million in order because they're so out of compliance that they needed to give them $80 million in order to try to move mental health patients through the system quicker. So, I just say all of that because, one of the things that we're talking about right now and that you guys will hear come up will be the fact that how do we not only expand the jail, but also create programs and wraparounds that will actually divert folks from having to be so overcrowded, because according to Chief Hovda, Chief Hovda, 97% of the people dealing with a high acute mental health issue have an STD issue as well, and that pretty much every single person in the jail right now has a mental health issue, and though that's the core of it, and we need to work on that too. And so we are going to be working on funding and looking at how to bring, a different funding strategies in to try to minimize the impact and the stress on the jail as we think about this going forward.
Okay, so these were the 9 options that were discussed by the board. I'll just tick through them. I think they're going to be pretty self-explanatory, but if you have questions, let me know. The full meal deal flex unit, that's what the sheriff wanted, 120 beds, pretty much phase 2 of the jail as it was originally conceived. A smaller flex unit of 40 beds. A complete overhaul of the old jail underneath the Hilltop campus, completely renovating that to meet the needs. A partial smaller scale renovation of the old jail, one piece of it to make it usable. Converting the juvenile jail completely and then building a new much smaller juvenile jail. So build a new smaller juvenile jail, turn the current juvenile jail into an offshoot of our jail. Taking a piece of the juvenile jail, a part of it, and remodeling it. So then and that takes a lot of architectural pyrotechnics because you need to separate completely adults and you have completely different management. So that was expensive, but something looked at. Renovating a pod within the existing jail. So taking out one of our direct supervision pods and creating more jail, more single cell out of it. So what they call Charlie pod now, like making another one of the direct pods like
you have
that.
price tags?
The price tags are in. These are my notes. The best price tags that we had, if you just work back through the memos, are the September 2016 memo is kind of the most complete one. It doesn't have all of these options, but it has what price tags look like in 2016.
For the flex unit for number 1, we do have the numbers for that, and that's 55 million because that's what we submitted a couple of years ago to Wasac when they were collecting the data for the jail
What we
study.
decided, so yeah, this was like, at the time, in 2019, when we were debating this was 40 million, and this was 28 million, and this is what the board chose to do, was number 2. Back before we paused for COVID, we chose to do this and design this, and that was gonna be around 32 million, like 28 million plus a 4, so 32, 40, and now like that 40 has become 55, I guess, as Commissioner Mejia said. Just to finish the list, there's a work release facility right next to the jail.
Yep.
I have some notes on that. You'll see, like Chief Toma at the time was like, they were really protective of those programs. There's been a different point of view about that at this point. There are 96 beds in there from a work release standpoint, but it would be much less than that if it got renovated into a hard facility.
But that's in the old jail within the buildings that we're planning to probably sell, right? And the Thurston County Courthouse.
No, this is next to the new jail.
Right in front of the new jail. And
Oh,
it's just not back online.
The 90 beds on the backside. Oh,
It's not
No,
back online
front
yet.
side, right,
Okay, yeah.
right in the front to the right of the jail.
yeah.
And then finally, the last thing was bringing in modular unit, like just completely freestanding, separate modular units on a temporary basis to house more people at the jail site. Now, you'll see some of the analysis in here if you work through this, which was that all of these have a capital piece and an operational piece. And anything that involved a different site, the operational costs would swallow up. So like, let's say one of them was only gonna cost 2 million, the other one's gonna cost 10 million. Well, gee, 8 million, that's a big savings. Well, if it's costing you an extra $2 million in operation a year, then in 4.5 years, you're behind, you've lost money. And we didn't have the operational money to, so that's why like the old jail, which at the time, I mean, now that we're really starting to move away from that facility, seems like we probably wouldn't go there. But at the time that we were debating this, we're sitting in that facility and we didn't know we'd ever be getting out of there. So this was a much more robust conversation about whether we should use the old jail. But what got me off of it was that, yeah, it was the cheaper, more expedient thing on the capital side, but then having a whole nother, all the duplicativeness of services, and you have to have female correctional guards in both sites, and you have to serve food, and you have to have medical treatment, I mean, all the things that having sites that were separated from each other just chowed up any savings through operational increases. That kind of was true for the juvie pieces too. This was the more elegant one because if we could squeeze the capital dollars out of it, it could be run much more efficiently all at the same site, which is why we eventually just bit the bullet and went with this. The work release facility, we were talked out of at the time, but I'm much more open-minded about thinking about that. But, God knows what it would cost now, but it's, again, it keeps that operational piece from getting out of control because it's all right there. And
They're still not utilizing it.
they're still not utilizing it. The
They
prosecutor.
want to, but they're not.
You're using it as a gym.
Prosecutor will tell you there's some data that work release doesn't, like studies show that work release, you'd think it would have a bigger impact than it actually does. And it's not super effective in like recidivism and stuff. So I mean, he's not, I've talked to the prosecutor about it. He's not averse to use it, to repurposing this for some other reason. We've talked about all sorts of things, like when we went down to Hillsborough and looked at their model and tried to figure out where could we do something like what they're doing. Well, so anyway, there's that for discussion.
Was there a cost associated with that one? I believe so. Let's see.
I saw.
So my notes say 3 to 5 million. This was a discussion from 2019, so fall of 2019. 3 to 5 million, 60 to 75 beds. Thomas says, where do all the other programs go?
That question's been solved because all the other programs don't exist anymore, is that?
I mean, they haven't for a while, but that's,
Yeah.
and there may be a new conversation to be had there, but I don't know what that would look like, but
Pretty sure that when the sheriff, we talked about it, that, in that meeting, that he was like, that's not starting up anytime soon, so.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Commissioner Edwards, was always really pushing for using the juvenile. He didn't like the optics of having this, facility that was almost empty while we were talking about spending money here, there, or everywhere. And he just really wanted to find a solution. I mean, he liked the idea of building a small juvenile jail and then using the juvenile jail that we have as a satellite adult jail. The judges did, were not in favor of that at all. Judge Schaller sent us a very lengthy, and I could is that letter part of the packet? I think I found that letter too.
It's not part of the packet.
Not part of the packet, but I can share with you that. I mean, they've built their programming, and I mean, it's integrated with their family court, and I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why they don't like the idea.
It is frustrating that there's a massive juvie with no use for it, and then we even bring up partnering with neighboring counties who have horrible facilities, and nobody there wants to talk about that either.
Yeah. So I guess I just hope you guys can all see that it's a pretty big problem that hasn't, and what I've been talking to Sheriff Sanders, I mean, things that I wasn't willing to really think about in 2019 because I was so new and I didn't know kind of like what Rachel's saying, like all the different things that might be able to be done to reduce population. And like, I wanted to try all this other programming and stuff before I started to just, here I am, my first day on the job, and let's build a $40 million new jail piece. I campaigned against, putting people in jail.
All your
like
ideals have been squashed and
well,
you've been
but there was
crushed. Your
but there
soul's
was a
been
problem.
crushed.
Well,
and so now you're-
there is a problem that is structural to our jail. It's not about that we're not doing good things with our jail population, but like the commissioners took a risk. Basically, they gambled in the Great Recession, and the gamble didn't quite pay off. They thought there would be a way to get that phase 2 built, and we haven't found that way because all of our other capital needs.
Yeah, and I'll bring up that, we kind of had this discussion in the larger group, and that, there's gonna be subgroups now that are, so when I talk about wraparound services for people with mental health, I'm not saying we do one or the other, it's a both and, we definitely need additional space, so we need to be thinking about what that looks like. And since 2018, the BHO has, or Medicaid and different funding sources already pay for portions of the staff that are in the jail. So there's already robust programs going on in the jail that are helping with these kinds of things. But I think that, when we are going to be talking about what kind of creative funding strategies and different kinds of programs that we decided to opt out of, could we possibly be bringing back, because the jail has said no to some, and we have money that could come in that would help offset that operational piece, but not the capital piece, right? And so those are the pieces that I'm talking about, is like, how do we get somebody else to pay for more mental health people in the jail? How do we get someone else to pay for correction officers who are gonna, because as you go from having this large room to these smaller rooms, you have to add another correction officer, to help staff. And so, and mental health actually pays for those correction officers. We pay for 2 of them right now. And so the BHO pays for those 2 right now. And so those are the kinds of discussions I'm hoping that we'll be having in the mental health subgroup, like that we'll talk about. And that, they'll lay out some of those programs, but at the same time, we still have to be thinking about what capital facilities are we going to have to adjust. And just so you know, Wayne, I had a pretty lengthy discussion with folks around the issues of the why not, because I have the question too of, we have a facility sitting there empty. 2, we have that work release facility, we really do, that are just sitting there that we could be doing something with, and the juveniles one too. But I've talked with them, and it's kind of like, could you break off one part? There's all these different options that could happen, but the reality is the law states we can't mix you can't mix adults and children together.
Yeah, I understand that. No, I was just saying that Mason County and Grace Harbor County have failing juvenile facilities, and I would like for us to be able to partner with them and contract with them and use our facilities for them. But
and I think that
every time we bring that up, there seems to be folks that have some type of ideological issues with it.
And I know they brought that up too, regional, like to discuss what we could do to collaborate regionally, to think about how else to bring funding in. But that, again, is operational funding.
County Manager, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about or you think I should cover in terms of the summary and history that you had asked me for?
No, Chair, thanks so much. I think it was important for the whole board and new staff coming to the table to hear about the 9 different options and how much work went into this. Also to hear about the financial path that we followed from 2016 into the recession, into the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, and where we're at currently. With that subcommittee.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for pulling out all these old documents. I know.
I want to thank the clerk because she and I tried every way. This 2016 memo, I don't know where it was hiding, but it was hard to find. And she found it finally. I was like, I know it exists. I could visualize this thing. You know, I poured over this thing with all the options and the prices, and it was like burned into my brain. It's like, that thing exists. We have to find it. And it's a good reference for you guys if you want to just kind of look at what the thought process was at the time. Because somebody went through and wrote the pros and cons for each one as it was seen at that time.
Props to you, Amy, then, for finding that. But yeah, no, this has been like a long-standing issue, and you know, we're not the only ones going through it. It's the reason why this was one of WASAC's priorities for their legislative steering committee back in 2023, and that's what funded the study. And now Commissioner Fournier is part of that work group that is looking at this. And one of my questions I remember for Commissioner Fournier is like, where are we at? And he was like, we're the best set, like compared to all these other counties. And I was just like, well, okay, you know that.
If the state was doing a needs assessment and they were starting giving out money to the people with the highest needs, we wouldn't be high on the list. Even though we have a space issue, you know, we still have a fairly modern facility.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh man, but I know that, you know, this has been a priority for jail staff. It's been a priority, I think, for both sheriffs. And, you know, because when we were, you know, I was asking for the information to put this in front of the legislator, like, we collected all of that information and sent it over. So, and of course, inflation was pretty high during that time. I think it was it was a really high year. So they calculated that into it, but Leah did a lot of work. And so I think there's just been so much work that's gone into this. And so I appreciate you bringing the history of it because I think it is important to look at all the options that have been looked at.
Yeah, I just wanted, part of my goal was just so you guys understood where I was coming from. Like, I haven't gone through all of this, you know, like I was resistant to all of it back in 2019, but, you know, I'm just a problem that's not going away and is not getting solved. Like, we've got to think more broadly.
So just given, you know, like hearing all the history and given like where we're at today, number 8, the work release facilities sitting there. I hate dead space, unused space. The work release facility sitting there, is that the least expensive way to find more space if that was to be renovated? It's right on site of the jail, so the operational cost would be, you know, minimized.
Well, looking at this memo, it sounds like reopening parts of the old jail was the cheapest capital.
But that's off the table now.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of so out of what's left, probably
the extra like side piece.
I've never been there, but he was
okay.
talking about the work release area.
Oh, okay, okay.
But I don't know it.
And then
it sounded like
Sheriff Sanders is this.
it did sound, yeah. I'd be interested in.
It was Matt and Linda.
I'm kind of curious about that one. I've talked back and forth with him about the work release program, and it doesn't sound like it's really being something that's brought back up, or they talked about it, they wanted to, but it's not happening.
at some point, I mean, this group that Commissioner Grant and I are on, I mean, it may be that we ask, I'd like to let that group kind of go a little further, but it may be that the board directs Central Services team to kind of reevaluate that one particular item, like update the numbers, so to speak, and give us a better sense of what that would cost us.
I still want to have a discussion about our unused juvenile facilities and some of our neighboring counties needing help. I mean, we keep saying that. Commissioner Mejia and I tried last year, and there was some, I think, judges that had some issues with it, but I don't think that should not be a dead issue.
I like that issue. I mean, I think that's a great idea too, about the juvenile, I mean, because that is a big discussion statewide right now around, you know, people are just like, we have a bunch of empty facilities and,
You go in
or,
Grace Harbor's juvie and it's deplorable.
and we staff, you know, we have like 28 staff on that program, you know, and so, it's, and 8 kids. So, you know, I think it's worth exploring that, but it's a completely separate
Correct.
discussion, yeah.
Comment, County Manager.
Yeah, I think updating these contexts and taking the same approach we took with the courthouse, which is engaging with the stakeholders to understand operational dynamics and then facilitate an opportunity for us to come together. I know that the judges, as all of you know, there's areas where they have some strong perspectives, and it would be good for them, for us to create an opportunity for them to come to the table so we can have a dialogue in its right time, and especially if it's about bringing folks on. And then just the operational component is, you're right, when there's ability to bring things together, we save on economies of scale and overhead. Build something separate than operational, so we would want to do both. Look at what does it cost to build and then what does it cost to operate, because you're right, you could save some dollars, but then end up spending on
At the time, we had capital dollars available and no operational dollars. Now we don't really have either. So, I mean, that's the reality. But yeah, I mean, it didn't make any sense to save 5 or 7 million and then have that chewed up in 3 or 4 years of increased operational costs.
And I think the opportunity we have is to frame this with the jail space subcommittee work group, get an understanding of where we need to go, and like we're doing with the courthouse, begin to create a pathway of what do we need to do to move that forward, what conversations have to take place, and bring alignment to it. So it would be something that everyone could agree upon, because there's probably not a solution that everyone's gonna love, but there's a solution we all have to get to, because like you said, Chair, this is not going away. We are a growing county. If you look at our stats from 10 years ago to today, and if you project forward another 10 years, we could have another 50, 60,000 people in our county. And that's what our trend is right now, so be prepared for that.
Okay, anything else this morning? We're back at 1 p.m. for Commissioner check-in, so we're adjourned.
Okay, thank you.